Hi, everyone. This is Marvin. I have the great honor and pleasure of actually moderating the food tech panel with three very, very distinguished guests. And so before I have the team introduce themselves, what I'm going to do is I'll introduce myself. Then I'm going to give you some quick stats and numbers about the food tech space, and then we'll jump right into it. So my name is Marvin. Usually based in San Francisco, was a startup guy, was a big tech VC, and also was a VC guy, and was a tech executive at Yahoo for many years. And now just basically man at large, angel investor, goofing around, and panelist, moderator guy. So some numbers about the food tech space. It's personally an area I'm really, really fascinated about, right? We all like food. We all eat food, hopefully. It's been a huge difference in sort of what's been happening, just even the last like 5 years in the food tech space. So I pulled up some numbers. In 2008, there were $60 million that actually went into the food sort of like space area, right? Fast forward to 2015, that was actually about $1 billion that actually went into the space. Fast forward to 2020, last year, the numbers that I ran, and this is TechCrunch, so it must be true, was $8 billion actually went into the food tech space. And so you've seen a huge dramatic change in this area. And I think to sort of talk about this area, I have three awesome panelists. So maybe we'll start ladies first. Pauliina, you want to start, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're involved with in the food tech space.
Yes, happy to. So I'm Pauliina Martikainen, investment director at the Maki.vc, a 80 million euro seed fund investing in deep tech and trend-driven companies across consumer and enterprise spaces. So basically our portfolio is everything from the kind of very deepest end. We've backed companies like IQM, the European pioneer when it comes to quantum computing, but then also had the kind of other end of the spectrum, which is more trend-driven cases like It's released a fashion rental company. And kind of the common denominators are definitely that many of our companies are either somehow completely changing an existing category or then even creating a new category. And many of the portfolio companies also fall under kind of a sustainability umbrella if you take a closer look. So that's kind of on the fund side, and personally, I've been spending most of my time in food, health, and retail tech, and basically, if there's anything consumer facing, that tends to land on my table. This being said, I also work with B2B companies, for instance, CarbonCloud and David, who's in the call. So have been backing some very exciting food tech companies.
Thank you, Pauliina. Mariliis, how about you?
Sure, thank you, Marvin, and thank you everyone for having me again at TechChill. It's exciting to be here, but in a totally different role. So I'm the co-founder and partner at Sustainable Food Ventures, and Sustainable Food Ventures is the world's first rolling fund on AngelList. And we started it together with Ryan Bethencourt about half a year ago. And so far we have invested in 24 companies over 5 continents and in 11 countries. So we basically raised 2.5 million in the last 6 months and then deployed it all already. And what's beautiful about the rolling fund is that every quarter is a new fund. So every quarter, basically a new fundraise starts for us so that we can support the founders out there. And the type of companies we make investments in are 3 types of technology based. So it's either plant-based, cell-based, or recombinant. And personally, my background is in food science. I'm a food scientist who specialized in flavor and sensory science. And prior to working at Sustainable Food Ventures, I was the head of food science at Finless Foods. So actually at the last TechChill that I was part of, I think it was 2019, I announced on the stage that I'll be joining Finless Foods. So it's nice to be back here and talk in this panel this time about the future of food. Thank you, Marvin.
All right, David.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Yeah, so my name is David Bryngelsson. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of CarbonCloud. And CarbonCloud is a SaaS company digitizing sort of climate science for the food industry and surrounding systems, because the food industry has been held back as far as climate change mitigation goes from a measurement problem and a communication problem, basically. And our agenda is to build the digital infrastructure to make it truly accessible and easy to measure quantitatively the climate footprint of any product wherever you are in the value chain of food production, and communicate that in sort of transparent and trustworthy ways with your stakeholders, your customers, be it a B2B or a B2C setting. And myself, I have a background in research. I've been doing this now for a bit over 3 years. Before that, I worked as a researcher for about 8 years doing research on climate change mitigation. And as a researcher, I was quite active in public outreach, doing media, public lecturing and stuff. And it became evident to me that what's holding us back from solving climate change is not a lack of fundamental understanding of climate physics or industrial systems or agricultural systems where the emissions occur. We understand those things well enough, but there's been a lack of access to that information by the decision makers within the industry, and particularly the food industry. The need to make a million little business decisions to transition from the current state to a future where we solve the problem. A problem that is truly solvable from an engineering perspective, as long as people have access to the right information at the right time. So that's what we are building and doing right now.
Very cool. Quick question, David. How long has your company been around? Just curious.
Yeah, so it was founded in the end of 2016, but in the beginning, the first 2 years, we were focusing on the restaurant sector with a menu planning tool, which was a sort of simpler tool. And then in the beginning of 2019, we made a bit of a pivot towards the food producers and with a new service, which I would say has where we have a more competitive edge, and it's more of a VC case type of product.
Okay, very cool. So we basically have 2 investors, and I would say 2 investors and 1 operator turned investor, and now 1 operator as well too. So this is actually great. This is a great panel. This is I give kudos to TechChill. So let's jump into it. Thank you all for the quick intro. So we have a very, very qualified panel as normal. What's happening? Why is this growth actually happening in the food space? Particularly over the last, that explosion has really happened, I think, really only in the last 5 years. What are the underlying trends? Why is this happening? And would be curious to hear all your thoughts on this, because I do think it's important to understand these underlying trends and why this is such an exciting space. Anybody? Yes, Mariliis, don't have to put up your hand. Just jump in. Just jump in.
Sure, I'm just used to that, but I'll jump in right away. So I basically tiptoed into the plant-based alternatives world around 2015, so it's about 6 years ago, and that was the year of International Year of Pulses. So it was an official UN Year of Pulses that they tried to make the plant-based more visible, more popular, more eminent in the space. But I would jump a bit many years, I would say 4 years ahead to 2019, when Beyond Meat came out with its IPO. And it was the 20 years most successful IPO in the world, in across any sector. And I think that was really the time when people woke up, really that, wow, this is a space that has so much potential. In the last 20 years, it's been the most successful IPO. This is something that we need to get into. So even though UN tried with the Year of Pulses, and I think they did a lot of good work in the academia circles and maybe for the food industry, but the general public, I think they realized with the IPO of Beyond Meat. But there are definitely many other things, but I see that as one of the biggest signals.
Okay, great point.
If I may add to that, I'd say 2 different trends. One is sort of a general digitization trend in society, which has been going on for a while, where sort of food has not participated in that until quite recently. And there's a lot of just communication gains to be had from sort of, digitizing information and moving it around more efficiently. And I think the other side of it has to do with sort of a pure resource efficiency thing. Like we had the Green Revolution sort of agriculture in the early 1900s or mid 1900s, and then we suddenly could move out of this Malthusian trap sort of thing and produce much more food. But now we are, so the population continuously grows so rapidly, so we are moving into new boundaries. Sort of, we're running out of space to produce food. At the same time as we're becoming more and more aware of sort of how we are messing up the planet and things we sort of ought to do about that. And looking at that, there are basically within agriculture and food production in general, there are some significant inefficiencies that can be overcome. Like, why do we eat meat, for example? Well, because we need a few things that come from it, but we don't necessarily need the animals to get those things. And this is sort of, people are learning this at the same time as we're having other sort of breakthroughs in chemistry and biotech, etc., that enables us to do some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm definitely with David there, that we need to kind of catalyze new business models and management practices in the food industry, enable structural changes in the food and overall like agricultural system that could achieve the policy goals of lower greenhouse gas. For instance, we need to improve food production and affordability. We need to improve actually population health equitably through better diets and nutrition, and really kind of throughout all of these things that we actually need to do, technology can have a huge role in terms of bringing efficiency to existing processes and introducing new models and products. And so kind of given the size of the food industry, which is obviously massive, and the kind of a role tech can play there in terms of developing it to kind of be better suited to consumers and societies of today, it's kind of no wonder that then food tech industry is growing like crazy at the moment. And it's actually funny, I just need to mention this anecdote, but it's really crazy to think how big the industry really is. So it seems like whenever you're looking at an investment opportunity within food, you really need to kind of add a zero to the market size that you're first assuming. So for instance, I was just looking at a case where I was completely blown away by the market size of soy sauce. I would not have ever guessed that it's like it was $42 billion or even beyond that, and even like as a startup, if you can make a product there that's a bit more ecological than the soy-based sauce and take even just a tiny bit kind of fraction of the market, you can already be massive. So that's just like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think people forget about how big the food industry itself is, right? So it's actually, just so you know, it's actually 10% of the global GDP.
Exactly.
Right? Like that's a tremendously huge amount. I'm going to throw another question, just related to this. How do you see consumer trends changing, right? Because a lot of these new foods, right, whether it's like Finless or Beyond Meat or other ones, are driven by they're usually a little bit more expensive than regular meat. I've tried all of them. When you go to the grocery store, how have you seen that change, right? Like both the economics of it, but even just consumer adoption in general. The fact that it's showing up in grocery stores is great, but I still not to the level it probably needs to be, right? I'm curious of all your views on this.
Well, I'm happy to start, but I guess kind of what's crucial, for instance, when like thinking about the alternative proteins space and so forth, kind of while there are kind of multiple intangibles such as health, the environment, and animal welfare that are the key drivers for kind of alternative protein purchases or production or our need for having those, I think consumers in the large maturity and kind of in the flexitarian and group are ultimately making their purchase decisions based primarily on product fundamentals like taste, price, and convenience. And I think in many parts we have a long way to go to actually be there for really the mass market.
I would say I think that there are large groups of society, or people basically more and more care about what they eat from a sort of conscious perspective. They care about the environment, they care about animal welfare, these things, but but you're not willing to give up just about anything or everything, at least for it. So as long historically people would agree that factory farming has its ethical problems associated with it, but the best ways to deal with it, unless you really like lentils, is to basically ignore it, right? But I think as we are sort of, for example, climate change is increasing on the agenda, and people start thinking more and more about these sort of environmental aspects. And then when someone like Beyond Meat comes around and offers an alternative, which is fairly similar to status quo, to what you're used to eating, it's a bit what Tesla did to the car industry, basically saying, hey, you can continue driving, you can even get this really awesome car, you don't have to give up anything, you just pay a little bit more, and you can walk away feeling good about yourself. And I think as these meat substitutes are coming now, people are starting to consider that. And that's also, I think, the same thing what we do when we help the food brands climate label their products. We make it easier for them to show that you can actually do something for the climate. It's not going to be hard for you. You get basically the same service, but this is better. And then once people start trying that, it's a bit of a slippery slope into thinking more and more about these issues and trying new things and maybe getting farther and farther away from the stake you started off with. And then, yeah, and this opens up this entire new market for alternative new products.
Right. Mariliis, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick one that I think I think the acceptance and the enjoyment of the new alternative really depends on what you can sample. And I think knowing that I'm going to Estonia, my home country, in the summer, I know that I'm not going to have the same fridge that I have here in the US, right? So I have my Just Egg, I have my Beyond Meat or Impossible, or like in all of the cheeses and everything that is available in abundance here. But I do know that in my home market, there will be a few alternatives, and definitely not in all the categories, because the innovation just hasn't reached there yet. So I think it really depends, the adoption depends on how many great opportunities there are available for the customer.
Do you mean that as a distribution thing, where it's like, so a lot of these companies are American companies, so distribution is obviously here in the US first, right? Versus sort of these, sort of, there are some companies in Asia and in Europe as well too doing these things, but just they may not have started distributing. Is that your point? Just to make sure I understand.
One is distribution, but the other one is also having local heroes, or kind of like local hero products that are just, in some categories, they're not there yet. For example, I haven't heard about a great egg alternative yet in Baltics or in Nordics, for example. So there's a lot of white space in Europe specifically as when it comes to plant-based, different various categories, not just meat alternatives, but other categories in innovation. And I'm very excitedly looking forward to it when it arrives. Does it arrive before the distribution of the brands here or not? That's just something interesting too, that I'm looking forward to.
Okay. And I guess actually a great sort of lead off to my next question is, you all cover very, very different areas in the new sort of like food space. What specific sectors are you sort of most interested about, right? It could be sectors, it could be companies, and please don't say Soylent, but like anything else but Soylent. I hate Soylent, it's awful. But like, I mean, like real food companies, right? Like real food tech companies. I would love to hear your thoughts as people who are practitioners and on the front lines.
I think we have a very sort of clear picture of which food brands we like. We like challenger brands who sort of understand that there's a transition happening now. Like the market is transitioning. Our governments, basically all of them more or less, have said that we're going to solve climate change. And that means that we're going to produce food differently, we're going to consume food differently. But the market will still be there in the future. And I think this is sort of a logical error that a lot of food manufacturers make. They think the market will disappear. Well, of course not. We're still going to be eating, right? But we are going to eat somewhat differently, and there will be this transition, and there will be winners in this race and losers. So we're looking for the challenger brands that are realizing that they can make a thing out of this and sort of expand their market share from this transition. And some of those brands are really new products, and some of them have been around for a long time, but sort of realize that, hey, our product might actually be fairly good from a climate perspective. And then you have this sort of really nice dynamic in the companies where they sort of quick to decisions and sort of jump on the trend and make a big thing out of it. And that helps fuel the mechanism itself, sort of this storytelling of it's happening now, the transition is happening now, it's actually going to be pretty cool to sort of jump on the train.
Any specific company you want to call out?
Yeah, like one which I think really got it is a British company called Tenzing that makes an energy drink, and they went from first contact to billboards in London in 3 weeks, which is sort of, they got it. Yeah. So we're going to do this. And yeah, we like that type of actor.
What's the name of the company again? I want to look it up. It's Tensing?
Tensing, yeah.
Tensing. Okay, cool. All right, check it out.
I think that's how
Learn
it's
something
pronounced,
new.
at least. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it.
All right, I'll look it up. Tensing. Very cool. All right, Mariliis, you've invested in a ton of companies. What are you excited about?
Sure. So we have invested in 24 companies in the last 6 months to state again, and yes, in 5 continents. So I'm actually excited about the investments we've done in all the countries, but specifically I'm curious how the investments in Africa and in India will go, because those are such, I've never been to either, so those are really exotic markets for me. Maybe not for everyone on the panel, but I personally am very, yeah, it's very exotic, definitely. But outside of the portfolio companies, I would say a company that I'm looking at intently is one of the companies that is here in the Research Triangle Park. They're called BioMilk. I think everyone is familiar with them, but what makes them so unique is that, sorry, Marvin, are you familiar with them?
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I've heard the companies are cool. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, so they're using cell-based technologies to make infant milk. And why is it exciting is that after half a year of breastfeeding, most infants, 75% of infants actually go on infant formula. And there is, I think to my knowledge, maybe there's one, but there's maybe just one plant-based infant formula out there that is actually nutritionally complete, and that there's just one option out there, and it's a huge market. So most of the infant formula comes with milk powder. And just like thinking about this company, I think there's a huge white space for this type of products out there. And if I come back, yeah,
no,
sorry?
just as I think about it, it's just like the baby milk space is huge, right? And parents tend to be fairly, frankly, price insensitive, as a dad too, right? So I'm like, yeah, I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
On my side, so maybe instead of companies, kind of like thinking about spaces that I'm eagerly eyeing. Definitely, although we already chatted about it a little bit, definitely the alternative proteins is something that I think is still kind of a massive opportunity. So kind of the way I see it is that we are now in this second wave after the first wave of plant-based burgers, etc., where it was easier maybe to kind of fake ingredients when the quality of the actual meat was low in the first place. So for instance, like replacing minced meat. But I think in this, and kind of then in the second wave, we've seen an emergence of cell-based proteins that typically take a small sample of cells from a living animal and then cultivate these cells, lab providing them with the right nutrients, etc. And as said, I think like ultimately like the customers will make the kind of a purchase decision based on taste, price, and convenience. And I think kind of since it's super hard, I think, to create an exact copy of the current products, I believe in the future there is definitely opportunities for kind of completely new products as well that do not like simply mimic the kind of incumbent counterparts. So I'm seeing a little of this now, for instance, like increased use of spirulina, algae, and so forth. But kind of overall, I think I'm expecting that the true growth in the space is kind of not necessarily even happening like between 2020 and 2025, but rather kind of like 2025 to 2030 when we are seeing more of these kind of completely new products as well.
Also, if I just may add to that, which I think makes that really interesting, is that when we talk about the price and convenience thing, since sort of the efficiency of putting feed into an animal and getting meat out is really terribly low. It's basically like connecting steam engines to the power grid. We just don't do that because it makes no sense, right? And the sort of potential efficiency from a chemical perspective for these lab-grown meats are, well, orders of magnitude higher. I mean, we could get very, very high. And that means that the price point potentially can go down, way down. And you can feed it with basically any protein source and get really nice proteins out. And so I believe like once we get there, there's, well, there definitely is a large market for whoever gets there first.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, it seems very, very clear to me, right? Just like, I don't think there's any question that this is going to be a very large market. It's already a massive market already, and it's growing very, very quickly. I guess, we talked about like all the positives, right? Like the consumer trends, the consumer awareness, there's government backing, like just the science is also getting there, we've gotten very, very far on the science side. What do you think is going to get in the way? Like, what are the risks? What are the challenges? I think as an industry, that's going to prevent this from happening, or sort of what is going to stop, sort of what is the biggest risk for companies who are in this space right now, right? Because it's not all great, right? Like there's a lot of great things happening, but there's also a lot of other stuff that's happening. I would love to get your thoughts here.
Yeah, I can go. For example, if we look at the plant-based and cell-based space, there are about 1,200 plant-based companies currently out there, and there is about 80 cell-based companies out there. So those numbers, I mean, one number is huge, one number is small, but still, if you're trying to be a differentiating cell-based company, there are still technological avenues that you can take. But the main thing is that I feel when it comes down to the consumer buying something, how do you become an iconic brand? I feel like in such a saturated market on both sides, actually, how do you become something that is iconic? How do you get the attention of the customer? How do you make sure that you are the one that is going to be put into your shopping basket? So I feel like that is something that all the companies we invest in kind of have to take into account, like how can they be differentiated to the customer, to their final customer that they're going to be serving in the future.
So you mean this from just to clarify, you mean this really more from like, how do you build a brand? How do you really sort of like figure out distribution, right? Very similar to, if I recall correctly, Beyond Meat worked with a bunch of like top chefs to sort of like get their burgers out, right? And they're like, oh, I want to try this thing. And,
yeah,
they built a brand like that way, right? Obviously not everyone's going to be able to do that. It'll be done in different ways, but it's figuring out some channel to the customer to sort of build their brand, right?
Yes,
that's my understanding.
Yeah, because one thing is scaling up the technology specifically for cell-based, but then it becomes a marketing question. How do you get the consumer's eyeballs? Because we're constantly overloaded with all type of information, but how do you then become the source of food for them, and how do you become the single one that is going to be purchased?
Yeah. If I may I think that is what you're painting here, that would be problems for the individual company, but I think we're coming from a place where this has been very underfunded. Like I know people who have been growing lab meat for years in universities and not getting any funding. Now it's getting attention and getting funded, and we're probably and hopefully moving into an over-establishment phase where we have so many companies starting out, and most of them will fail, of course. But I think as an industry, as a transition, it probably won't stop and probably cannot stop. But I mean, there are some very strange initiatives, particularly in the EU, for what things are allowed to be called and how they can be compared, various things against like things that are driven by the agricultural lobby in these sort of strange attempts of stopping this from happening. I think that will fail, but those stopping attempts, that is. But I mean, I think those more structural or policy things that potentially could prohibit or like enforce labels that would really scare people off, those sorts of things, I think, may sort of delay the transition for sure, definitely in some places. But I still, I think it will happen anyway, eventually.
Yeah,
and it almost has to. Please, Pauliina.
I actually think that kind of thinking about the incumbents that are now lobbying against the change, I think they can actually or should have a role in terms of driving the crowd as startups, for instance, lack the ability to scale production at least in some of the areas. So for instance, like if you look at the numbers, I think it's like 3.5 million tons of alternative meat and like over 5 million tons of alternative dairy product would be needed to be produced by 2030. And for context, like I think it was Lightlife who just announced an investment of $100 million to develop a factory that produces 4.5K tons of alternative meat, which is like 0.1% of the required growth, although we're celebrating it as a massive win. So I really think that the incumbents actually should kind of play together with the startups to actually like enable production at scale, for instance. And then kind of after that, obviously it's then on the kind of an individual company level as to who builds the winning brand and so forth. But I think there is room for many, but we just need to fix some of the kind of underlying issues still.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that, where I do think when you think about sort of other industries, right, where usually, like, let's say most of CPG, I think a lot of CPG companies, like, we already own the distribution, like we should be, they're buying a lot of new brands, right, to sort of push through the distribution. That hasn't, I think that's one of the reasons that hasn't happened in the food space area, because it's still relatively new. Right. And I also think that the market share of just sort of the traditional meats and foods in general, outside of like ice cream and other things, haven't really been eroded yet. But I do think that's going to change. And just as an anecdote, I remember I'm going to talk about a very, very big ice cream company out of Switzerland. Not going to mention who they are, but met and talked to the senior executives. I remember talking like the change within sort of a 2 or 3 year difference, where like they're super cocky and arrogant doing their Silicon Valley, tech tour. Must have been back in 2014. Boy, when they came back in 2017, watching their ice cream market share drop, like they're like, we want to talk to any startup founder, right? Like anyone who's going after this space, and actually being very, very aggressive in whether sort of direct investing, potentially doing direct investing, or actually just pure acquiring these brands that were cutting into their, literally cutting their market share. I don't think that's happened yet on the food side, right? Like, whether some cellular meats or plant-based meat side, but probably like, I'm going to guess maybe five years out is sort of my prediction, where just like, I still think like we're still early days, but these incumbents don't wake up until they start to lose market share, right? It's my guess. And so I think we have a couple minutes left. Advice for new startup founders, right? Like coming into this space, we need more startup founders in this space, right? Like we're just at the beginning. It's one of the most exciting spaces around these days. And really, I think will have huge impact in general on the environment, on society in general. What advice would you have for them, for folks who are looking at this space, whether from the scientist side or maybe FMCG folks who want to stop working for the big sort of like dumb CPG companies and want to come play in this area? What advice would you give for them?
I think David is the best one to start.
David. Yes, David.
That is a very tough one. Like coming from university, doing this now, like if you think this is for you, go for it. Like, and it might be the ride of your life. And I think just doing this whole new, like bringing something new to market, starting a company, it's an awesome experience. But I think it's good to have at least the thought I had. It needed to be fun, even if it doesn't work, because you dedicate so much time of your life and you live on bare minimum for a while there. And yeah, but I think I know that there's so many good ideas out there that are not being sort of developed further. And sort of, it's so common to hear someone say, yeah, but I invented YouTube before YouTube was there. Yeah, but someone brought it to market. And this is the case here as well, of course, that there's a lot of work involved, and make sure to involve the right people early on. But if you find people who are dedicated, go for it. I guess that's the best advice. And yeah, find good advisors from wherever you find them. They're very valuable.
All right. That's good advice for any startup in general. All right.
Yeah, I think it's quite broad.
Mariliis.
Sure. So maybe a bit selfishly, because we're a sustainable food ventures fund and we're specifically for food focused, then I would recommend just either go to the grocery stores and like look at the aisles and pick your favorite products that are not yet plant-based or cell-based, and then kind of just like to pick your favorite and then go for it and make a company out of that. So, or just even when you're in your home and look at your online basket, what you usually order, just think what is out there that is still not plant-based or cell-based that you would like to see you yourself eating, or your friends and family, just like that. I think there are so many great areas that there's no innovations on yet. Like, for example, I mentioned plant-based egg. There is nothing yet out there in Nordics or Baltics or either in Europe. It's just coming to the market, right? Then there's so many, and I'm sure everyone has their favorite food that is not yet plant-based or cell-based. And then really do it if it comes from your heart, and do it with people that you know more than 1 month. That would be my personal experience. Just to say that you know someone, you know how to work with them, and you know that they'll be there for you on this long and rocky, but also fun and bumpy road.
Good. All right.
May I add
Pauliina.
another thing, actually, to it?
Please.
Here,
Please.
is that like when it comes to which product to pursue, if you're going to make something, I don't even think it matters if someone has already solved it, because that's the good thing about the food industry being so large and how it is already. You can find several different brands of cow's milk, for example, next to each other. And they are quite similar as products, but they still have market shares. And then you have different countries. And I mean, there is no natural monopoly here. There can be so many different producers, but make sure to pick a product you're passionate about the taste of already. You love it, so you know when you get it right.
That was actually
looking for something good in ice cream. Yeah, something good in ice cream that doesn't use milk. That'd be great. Like vegan ice cream, that would be really good. I have seen it. There's some vegan ice cream apparently I've seen.
We have some in the freezer.
Sorry,
you can come by and try it.
I will when I'm let in. All right, Pauliina.
No, hard to kind of add anything. That those were some super solid advice. Maybe I would have said something similar to David's, that actually, like, when you've kind of chosen what you think you want to pursue, then actually do the kind of a proper research on the background in terms of kind of the numbers, to see how big the opportunity really is, where it actually is there a kind of space in the market, and kind of like the typical mistake that many of the founders I see in Finland and in the Nordics is that they kind of think that they need to for instance, if they bring a new product to the market, they tend to like somehow price it on a very lower end, thinking that they need to compete with price. But if you actually have an outstanding product and a better product than the existing ones, also kind of value your own innovation accordingly, and run the numbers in the background.
It's a great point. And I should mention, many of these foods, many of this new sort of like food tech that you see in the grocery stores, actually they're all premium priced, and people pay for them. They do very, very well. So have that margin. That margin will be very, very helpful for you as you build your brand, for
exactly.
Sure. Those are pretty much most of my questions. And so I guess I'm going to wrap this up. I think this is a net is that the water is very, very hot here in the so the water's warm, right, in the food tech space, and please jump in, right? We want more people to participate in this area. Still, I think, like I said, in the past, it's been, particularly the last couple of years, the growth rate has been crazy. But if you're looking for something where we're really in early, using sort of the US baseball sort of analogies, we're in the very, very early innings of this game. And so there's a long ways to go, I think, in the food tech space. But it's very, very exciting right now. And it's one of the very few spaces, I would argue, that will really have a big, big impact on people, on big impact in general on the environment and on this earth. And so we want more people participating. And so I want to thank all of you for joining and sharing your insights and knowledge with everyone here at TechChill. Thank you, David. Thank you, Pauliina. Thank you, Mariliis. And thank you again. I hope to see you all live in Riga next year at TechChill.